Hello, everybody. You're welcome to today's episode of Africa Talks Tech. On today's episode, we're going to be talking cloud computing in Africa, emerging trends and perspectives. And on today's show, we've got Mr. Remi Adejumo on the show. Sam, what do you make of today's session?
Well, today's session is going to be really interesting because when we typically think about cloud providers, we only think about the big ones. This is going into Africa and listening to someone talk about cloud providers locally set up to provide local cloud computing needs and complementing the bigger providers. It's going to be an interesting talk because Mr. Remi is full of a lot of great information. So without much of ado, kick back, sit back, and enjoy the rest of the show. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are and whatever time you're watching this show. Today on the show, we've got Mr. Adejumo. I like to just call him Remi because that's a cool name. And I've also got Kazeem here with me, as we usually do. And if you don't mind, Remi, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
It's great to be here. My name is Remi Adejumo. I'm passionate about cloud computing. I'm a civil engineering graduate. I've worked in technology for over 5 years. Worked in the UK, in France, in Belgium, and Switzerland. And I've spent the last 12 years working in Nigeria. Prior to cloud, I used to be head of infrastructure. EcoBank Nigeria, and I also spent 2 years working for Resourcery. But in the last 5-6 years, I've been pushing the advocacy on cloud computing, as well as running Cloudflex, which is a cloud platform here in Nigeria. So that's what I'm doing.
Thank you very much for that. For those of our audience that are meeting me for the first time, I'm Sam Erskine. I'm head of customer experience for a large organization in the UK. I'm an African diaspora, so I grew up in Africa, but I've been living in other parts of the world ever since. So Kazeem, I guess it's up to you to introduce yourself a little bit as well.
Thank you very much, Sam. My name is Kazeem Adegwega. I'm based here in Nigeria, and I lead a team of very beautiful people at the LASU CBT 18. So, thank you very much, Mr. Remi, for joining us on today's episode of Africa's Top Tech. So, Sam, did you want to proceed with the first question for Mr. Remi?
Yes, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Mr. Remi. The first question I have is really more around what is the state of cloud computing in the African market today, and what do you think the future holds for it?
Okay, so what we have at the moment is that most of the African market is pointing towards Azure and AWS. So in my estimation, I think we have about 95% of the market pointing in that direction, rather than situating with the local companies here in Africa.
Thank you very much for that. Just building on top of that, Kazeem, what would you follow up this question with? Because we are aware of the big providers, and Mr. Remi's just touched on the fact that we actually have local providers in Africa.
Yes, exactly. So I'll just want to also ask Mr. Remi that where do you want to place Africa now in terms of infrastructure, data center readiness for the cloud? You mentioned AWS, you mentioned Azure, but are we also having some local people, set up infrastructure and data center in Africa?
Okay, if we look at it Africa-wide, there are major centers. You've got South Africa, you've got Kenya, and you've got Nigeria. So with those three major centers, what you have in those countries is you've got a minimum of at least 12 to 15 data centers. Obviously, you've got a lot more in South Africa than you have in Kenya and Nigeria combined. So in those data centers, you then have the cloud platforms. So here in Nigeria, we have at least 5 or 6 cloud platforms in the data centers in Nigeria. Bearing in mind, we've got at least 12 data centers in Nigeria, and we've got a number of them still coming on stream. If you look at, just to sort of mention the points, that in Africa, the rest of the developed world see Africa from a technology standpoint as the next growth area, because they see a higher percentage of growth in Africa than they see in America or in Europe. So you find that there's attention put to Africa from that point of view in every one of the sectors. And to show a case in point, that's why there's a heavy investment from Google with their subsidiary called Equiano, and the one from Facebook that's called Two something. I've forgotten what that's called as well. That's coming in 2024. Google is going to come in this year. So those investments would not come in, or you would not have the focus on Africa if there wasn't that potential growth or the potential of the African market.
Thank you very much for that. And I did say I grew up in Africa. What I should also add is that my father was one of the first to start working in the computing industry in Africa, and actually grew the mainframe market, and then further on into personal computing. Now, looking at the changes that drove in Africa in terms of moving from typewriters to using, computers for billing, etc. What do you see happening from a business leverage perspective? Those that are investing in the cloud from Africa, companies and businesses that wasn't present, in the past.
So if you look at it, and I think I will answer it this way: what is the usefulness of cloud computing in technology or in the advancement of technology? The usefulness and the benefit of it is the concept that you have and the economy of scale. By moving into the cloud, what you're doing is that you're creating a cheaper platform than what you would for your infrastructure than what you would have in-house. So there's a natural logic as to why you have cloud computing. It's not so. This is not just a developed country idea that you're moving to Africa. It's something that more for us than them, because of the problems we have, infrastructural problems we have, problems in terms of power, problems in terms of you have a lower GDP per capita than you have in the Western world. So we have buying power. Anything that would take you money, give you the same thing at a lower cost is attractive for business, and it's attractive for the growth of that business. So that's the fundamental driver for cloud computing. And that's what we are trying to address in Africa, to say, we will put this in Africa. And also, if you look at we call them hyperscalers, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. There's room for them to play. And our philosophy is that we compete against them. We don't compete against them. What you have is that the local cloud companies provide local Africa-centric solution, whilst the hyperscalers provide global solution. So today, you have businesses using the hyperscalers, but they're not full benefit out of that because their needs are not as developed as a business that sits in London, sits in Paris, sits in New York. You're paying a lot more for what you're getting than what you would pay for if you're situated on a local cloud platform in Africa.
Thank you. So, Kazeem, if I may just little clarification point. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Rem, because that's helped me to understand it. So effectively, when we talk about the local cloud businesses in Africa, they are similar to the fintech industry, where it's tailored to assist the African business owner to meet the needs in the African market versus the hyperscalers that are much more broader and have more of an international reach.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Mr. Remi, for the response to the question. So you've just touched on cost a little bit because I believe that's one thing. Some of the businesses now they're still having some cold feet about migrating some of their workloads to the cloud. Perhaps we want to say because of they are scared that are they going to end up paying more in the cloud versus still doing things the way they are doing it now. But I would like you to give your take on this or share a little bit more light on this now. Can you give some examples of how cloud is fast-tracking innovation in Africa today, and perhaps how some of the startup companies can leverage on cloud computing?
Sure. You see, if you take the first part of the question and you look at the cost, what you call the cost vis-a-vis on-premise to cloud. If you look at on-premise, what we have in the cloud, if you're going to replicate that in your office, it's going to cost you a lot more money because the power, if I'm providing power, by the way, power is provided by the data center, not by the cloud platform. So the data center providing the power is providing power to, let's say, 1,000 people. Somebody providing power for 1,000 people is going to do that much cheaper than you can provide for yourself. It's just an economy of scale. The same thing goes for the cooling, because you have precision cooling. You're not just using your standard air conditioning. You need to have the UPSs and inverters because you have to have a bridge. When power goes, something carries it in an emergency before you switch over to the other power. Even from a maintenance point, that's the way data centers work. They have the inverter and UPS as a bridge. Those things are incredibly expensive. I mean, these guys are using 100, 200, 300 batteries just to run the whole infrastructure that they have. So that economy of scale means that, and what they say is the total cost of ownership, your infrastructure is 70% cheaper in the cloud than on-premise. That's a given thing. The next thing you look at, when you compare the cost of the hyperscalers to us in Africa, we match their prices or do better than their prices. One of the key differences is that the hyperscalers charge you for taking your data off the platform. We don't do that in Africa. So that's a running cost that you never quantify, and it's dependent on the intensity of your business that determines how much you spend on that. So when you look at a startup, one of the problems with the fintech is that everybody wants to do their own thing. And that's a huge problem if your platform is not big enough, that your cost of infrastructure is small in comparison to your startup cost. So just for an example, if you're running $1 million business, it doesn't make sense to go and put in $2 million of infrastructure when you can take the same infrastructure and just pay a fraction of it, especially when you find that a lot of startups is speculative. So why are you owning assets that you're not sure how much you're going to use, going to change or evolve into something? And that's the benefit of that's the agility and the capacity. Those are the words used in cloud computing to say the advantages over a sort of capex spend and trying to build your own infrastructure from the ground up. And there's a speed to market because the platform's there already. You don't have to spend money on it. So that's the advantage to a fintech, that you can get a lot from the platform, far more than doing it yourself.
Oh, okay. Sam, you still got some follow-up question for Mr. Remi?
Well, I do have a slightly different question. It's still part of the follow-up. So we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about the opportunity. We do know that we do have governance challenges in Africa. So in terms of regulatory reforms, what would you like to see happen on the continent that can help local cloud providers not necessarily just compete with the bigger providers, but to ensure that you can provide the same assurance as some of the larger providers do that is specific to your market?
Okay, what we don't do in so a lot of the African countries is that we don't enforce the data localization and the data sovereignty, which and What is that? That's basically the fact that data that is created in Nigeria, for example, should reside in Nigeria. Now, some people just, words like protectionism comes in, people saying that this is not right. Why are they looking at that? But I'll give you a reason for it. And the reason goes like this. When you sit on a hyperscaler, you are subject to the government of that country. The biggest regulator in Nigeria, for example, is the CBN, because they regulate the banks, the finance companies, the fintech, the microfinance. Every financial institution is regulated by them. Now, they have absolutely no law that tells these guys that the data must be kept in Nigeria. Not doing that harms us because it does not allow that revenue to stay in Nigeria and to develop the Nigerian market. That revenue goes to America and develops the American market and develops people in America and does nothing for our growth in Nigeria. That's a key thing as far as I'm concerned. So from an advocacy standpoint, not as a company that will benefit from it, but when I look at it and advocate for that, I strongly believe that we need to keep a lot more of the percentage of that money in Nigeria. And I think you will see a lot more growth in terms of the development of individuals who will move into technology. The development of the infrastructure will be so much better, and even for the region, because whatever we do in Nigeria affects the region in terms of data centers, cloud platforms, and things like that. And I think also it will push the technology, which is Africa-centric, because we have peculiarities, we have the needs for Africa, which if the funds are not spent in Africa, there's not going to be any development to suit the African market or the African future.
Thank you for that. So, Kazeem, do you have any further questions or clarifications you would like to ask Mr. Remi about? Because he's a fountain of knowledge. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Yes, exactly. I was going to ask about data residency, why data residency is a big deal, but you already talked on that. So I'm going to ask from this report from Gartner, they projected that is going to exceed beyond about $397 billion by the end of 2022. So being that you are also in the business yourself, do we have statistics to show how much of this plenty money, would come to Africa or would stay in Africa, considering that we have businesses in Africa also leveraging cloud now?
Yes, I do have our stats for Africa. I have Africa-wide stats. So the Africa-wide stats is that cloud computing in Africa is worth about $2 billion. What I did was I took that figure and I worked out the three major areas of South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria. I reckon that about 1.2 billion of that is in South Africa. And I reckon that Nigeria is spending in the region of $500 million worth of that. That figure of 373 billion is worldwide. So, and that is mostly by AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. AWS has 40% of the market. Microsoft Azure has about 20% of the market, and Google has about 9% of the market. And then the rest of the market is consumed by IBM, Oracle, and they don't really count the Chinese companies because the Chinese is a closed market. What the Chinese government does is that because of their numbers, they simply keep on their platform. So you've got Alibaba and WeChat, or I've forgotten what they're called, but those are sort of things on there. So those are counted a bit different, but that's the Western world and the budgets in the Western world. Just to give you an insight on this, the hyperscalers, when you look at AWS and Azure, they're being very clever. So what they've done, and the reason why they go and build data centers in various locations in the world, is to satisfy those data residency and data localization laws. Countries like Russia, India are very, very particular. You cannot do business there if you don't have a local presence. they've gone into South Africa to, both Azure and AWS went into South Africa just to say they've got an African presence. And even if you go to the AWS landing page, you wouldn't even see South Africa as a region, even though it's a region there. And it's not a full-fledged region, which means that it's telling me that it's just for the sake of that data residency and data localization. That's the reason why they say they have a presence in Africa. So again, I mean, for me, that leaves a lot of room and a lot of opportunity for the local companies to do something. In saying that, if you go and look in the States, there are a lot of local companies like Rackspace, who are data center owners. They're not as big as AWS and Azure, but they're doing an amazing volume of business for the American markets. So there's a huge market in there that are dealt with outside of the hyperscalers. So these companies that have a global reach, there's a benefit to them. The benefit to them is that if you've got a global business and you hook up into them, then you have access to the world. So that's why I say we complement them. So if you have a, let me call it an African business, not just a Nigerian business, that is doing really well and wants to expand to the rest of the world. Just for example, let's say the business sells African clothing and people in the world want to buy. So what you do is that you could sit on a local cloud in Africa, but you connect into the hyperscalers so that you can reach every corner of the world, because that's the good work that they've done. They have connected the world. So for example, AWS has their own internal infrastructure. They don't use the internet. So if you want to send data from Africa to Australia, it's faster within the AWS network than if you just send it yourself. So there are advantages of that, and they're complements, and you can hook up anything, any local cloud to a hyperscaler and benefit, get the best of both worlds. So you've got a local-centric provider that can meet your needs, and at the same time, you've got an international provider that gives you that reach into the world.
Thank you very much for that. And we'd just like to summarize and say it's been an educational trip around cloud computing, but more particularly cloud computing uptake in Africa with a local provider. So on that note, Kazeem, I'll leave you to close it out for this show.
Okay, so I just want to say a very big thank you again to Mr. Remi for joining us on today's episode of the show. So I'm just going to push it again to Mr. Remi to, say a final word, and, we can say bye-bye now.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the chat. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts about cloud computing in Africa and the development of it. I mean, I look forward to us being able to get together again and talk a lot more. There's a lot to talk about machine learning, to talk about artificial intelligence, to talk about the translation of languages, because I think that's another way of getting Africa connected more to the world, that you have an ability that somebody can talk in their local language and communicate in business with somebody on the other part of the world. And your cloud platform is actually doing that translation for them of the business, so that those barriers and obstacles that you had previously because of people speaking different languages is done, automated in an automated fashion and things like that. So there's a lot more to talk about, and I look forward to us getting together again and being able to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. So here is what we have for you on today's episode of Africa Talks Tech. So be kind enough to join our channel on YouTube. So it's Africa Talks Tech on YouTube, where you can also have a rewatch of our previous episodes. So we'll draw the curtain here today. So continue to keep safe until next time. So it's bye-bye from myself and Sam.
And bye-bye, and thank you very much, Mr. Remi, and chat to you soon.
Thank you so much.